2, and 1. Hello again. I am Matt Davio. I am the host of the 1 Minute Trader podcast, and I am lucky enough to have a special guest today. I've got Rande Howell, who is a licensed therapist that has been educating and training traders for a number of years, and we're going to talk a little bit about mastering trader psychology. Rande, thanks for coming on today. I do appreciate it. And you're coming to us from lovely Charlotte, North Carolina.
Yay, Charlotte.
And I truly mean that.
Charlotte. Yeah, I love Charlotte. It's a great town.
Have you always been from North Carolina?
No, before North Carolina, I lived for a number of years in California, and I was really glad to leave that area.
Where'd you live in California?
In the Bay Area, and I have a cartoon on my mirror, and it's a cartoon of this judge sitting up in his seat, and he's about to pronounce sentence, and he's about to use the gavel, and he's looking at the guy that's just been convicted, and he's saying, "Your crime is so heinous that I'm sentencing you to a lifetime in California." And at any rate, from my experience in California, I just thought, man, way too many people, and moving back to the South and to Charlotte in particular, it's just been it's been a great life here.
So, you're in the banking capital of the Southeast, behind New York and Chicago. Then you have, Charlotte, which is really a huge retail banking center for the United States today, and it has become such. How did you, as a licensed clinical therapist, how did you get into the trader psychology? Because, and I'll tell our viewers, as I asked you before, do you trade? You told me, no, I don't trade.
Yeah, so I'm not interested in it.
You're not interested in it, but you're interested in helping traders be more mindful, be more patient, be more disciplined. So how did you go from a clinical therapist just dealing with, I'm sure you had a successful practice, into, trading, working with traders on a regular basis?
Yeah. Well, first of all, I am fascinated by the mind that engages uncertainty. I really am. I'm just absolutely fascinated by it. And working with traders and portfolio managers and fund managers is just absolutely fun to me. How I did it, now I kind of told you this, and it's really true, is that I was actually at an Episcopal spiritual retreat that turned out being very drunken. And what happened, but during that retreat that I was part of, and I was actually delivering part of the spiritual retreat, is a guy was in my workshop, he really liked what happened to him, and he came up to me afterwards, and he said, "I understand you're also a performance coach." And I said, "Yes, that's true. I work with the banking industry and the financial community in Charlotte." And he said, "Well, I'm having performance issues in my business." And I said, "Well, what business is that?" And he said, "Well, I run a small hedge fund, so my partners and I trade." And I said, "Well, what's that?" And literally, this is like 10 years ago. And ultimately, though, is he had very common problems that almost all humans experience when the human brain experiences uncertainty. He did not, he was not trained to be able to take the way nature had built the mind and brain to react to uncertainty, which is uncertainty, confusion, vulnerability, fight, flight. That's just kind of the way it happens. And he didn't know how to cool that circuitry down. And he wanted to know how to do it because it was costing profits. And ultimately, he did very well. And out of that, I started getting referrals. And before I knew it, this is the profession I'm in.
Yeah, it's a very small but powerful business.
Yeah.
One that's moving a lot of money or small money around, right? From retail to institutional. And you even made a comment, that retail traders don't really know how to, position themselves mentally. But I even said to you before we started this, it's all the way up to institutional. And I work with traders all the time and teaching them methods in looking at risk, right? And I say that first because it's really important. And I also do talk quite a bit about psychology, but I'm not a licensed therapist. And I can definitely tell you about experiences I have had and continue to have as a trader. But, and there is a lot of repetition. But the thing that always intrigues me is, as you said, and I consider myself not a technician, Randy, nor a fundamental trader. I have always intuitively, I have a lot of intuit about behavioralism. And I had this as a kid in the sense that, and again, I knew that it was inherent and I was born with it, but I could take advantage of the way people's emotions played on themselves in business and different things, and not in a preyful way, and preyful meaning attack, but in just it was an internal knowledge that I had, and I think it was something that I was given. Now I can't explain it. I can't explain it, and it doesn't mean I've perfected it, because I don't believe in perfection.
Well, I want to tell you, I can actually help you with that right there. Is actually define it. What you're talking about is intuition, okay? And I actually define intuition as unconscious pattern recognition. Mm. And I take it out of the whole thing of ESP. I take it out of the psychic. I'm all emotional intelligence. You're not going to get me out of the emotional intelligence framework. And ultimately, so what you're looking at, a person who has intuitive abilities, they're able to recognize pattern, and they don't know how they recognize the pattern. Yeah. They just somehow do that, and that's happening all the time. And it's just that a lot of us, we push that away, and it just doesn't become part of our working mind. I once worked with the reason the guy actually called me, he says, Randy, I have hedge funds paying me big fees. And I can't take my own advice, and I can't trust my own intuition. And literally what we did is he smelled blood. He didn't see charts and stuff like that. It was blood for him. Mm-hmm. And he could just smell it. And he's working with a 8-figure account. So it's not like he's a small little player on the thing. But ultimately, what we were able to do is we were able to distinguish what I would call the quiet voice and invitation of intuition from what we would call temptation. Take it, you can do it. But it required him to learn more about his mind. And intuition is a very powerful evolutionary skill to have. Is that you should innately understand where the saber-toothed tiger hides out, and the person who knows that innately and can kind of feel it is going to have a much better survival rate than people who don't. Right. So the thing is what happens. You're born with with an overabundance of intuition, but it's not like other people don't. I have found that most really good traders have a chunk of intuition that aids and abets the way they calculate decisions.
Would you say that bonus intuition level that they have allows them? Again, I don't believe that I can predict, but yeah. I do feel I can get out in front of a cresting wave, if you will.
Yeah.
And sometimes probably my biggest problem is I'm always early in that intuition. And I've had to teach my, what were the terms that you just used? Because I want to try to use them. Kind of my not present feelings. I've had to not push them aside, but work through them and say, yeah, okay, this is going to be the trade, but it's not right yet. So I've had to pause and learn some kind of other pausal skills to wait for the actual event to start?
I tell you what, I can help you with that in that I have a way of languaging that might be very helpful for you. Is that, first of all, we would redefine the brain as a community of rival emotional programs. Okay,
I like
just
that.
not. Well, that's in neurobiology. That's what and if you were to look at the movie Inside Out, the kids, not comedy but cartoon,
Mm-hmm.
that thing is rich in understanding how the brain forms mind from the emotional programs, and you see the competition between emotional programs, and who wins organizes kind of like how that kid's going to act. And if you understand the brain as a community of rival programs, it's duked it out and has organized a particular self that is able to manage the environment that it lives in. That's what the brain's doing. And if you move from that to mind, this miracle of mind, that somehow mind emerges out of this brain, and suddenly the mind is where these emotional programs are given voice as your thoughts. Okay? And I actually call that the committee of the mind.
Mm-hmm.
And in my work, what we're doing is we're saying you have to calm the emotions down first. But then what you do is you produce the mindfulness, the ability to observe and step back out of thought, and you start observing your mind, and most people discover it's a mess.
Yeah.
I mean, it's a mess in there. And particularly in trading, what you have is you have competing factions going on in the mind. And if you looked at it like a boardroom where, you know, there's a proxy fight going on, you see different factions having different agendas, and they're at war with one another. It's an internal struggle.
Mm-hmm.
And ultimately what happens is that you will need to learn to reorder that mind. And again, when we were talking earlier, is the standard default programming for the brain when it engages uncertainty is to produce confusion, then vulnerability. And vulnerability is hardwired to fight flight.
Right.
Okay? It's just hardwired. That's the way it works. And that's actually called the low route, the low road. It hits information hits the thalamus. Thalamus is blocked it going to the thinking centers of the brain and sends it immediately to the amygdala and fight flight. What happens is that you realize, okay, I can reorganize that first in calming it down. And I know that in the same way that there is fear living within me, and anger living within me, lust living with me, and greed living within me, so is their discipline, so is their courage, so is their self-compassion or self-soothing,
Mm-hmm.
and so is their impartiality. They're all emotional programs. That's the whole ticket there, is you go, oh, these are emotional programs. And what I've done is I've developed techniques for being able to take those emotional programs and pull them and summon them up into working mind. And then you, from a mindful situation, you are reorganizing who has a say-so in the mind about who engages uncertainty. And like the thing is that you never have freedom from emotion. However, what you have is freedom of emotion. You can train the mind to engage uncertainty from a disciplined impartiality, rather than that, oh my God, I may lose, or, oh, look at me, I'm going to win, I'm going to win, I'm going to win. That big thing is like when in an institutional trading room, everybody's gut, before a big announcement comes, their gut gets liquefied, everybody has to go to the bathroom, and they come back and they're all like this.
Yeah.
And what you're looking at is they're in fight flight.
Right.
And what you're doing is, I can reorder that so that I have a disciplined, impartial mind. And when you do that, and then you start saying, well, I need to invite intuition to the party. And you begin to understand is intuition's always been there, but its voice is much quieter than a lot of the raging voices that go on inside mind. And you have to make a spot at the table of the mind that literally it can show up and it can make contribution. And it's not like you're acting on intuition, but what happens, intuition becomes part of the decision-making process that this new brain, this new mind, that it uses to make decisions. there's a couple of really great traders who, George Soros is, I guess, probably most famous, where, you know, his intuition would show up as backaches and stuff like this when he needed to be out of positions. And, you know, it just depends on how much you want to develop it and whether or not you have the technology. And with me, I'm training people to test how accurate the intuition is. And if it's 50-50, it's not really that useful.
Mm-hmm.
But most of the traders I work with, the ones that are really good, you start finding out that their intuition is accurate like 75% of the time.
Mm-hmm.
So it's above, you know, basically 50-50. So it should be making a contribution to effort. And when you see that, it gives you an edge to the decision making of a rational mind. So yeah, I congratulate you. And like I said, most really good traders, that's part of what they do, except again, it's unconscious pattern recognition where they know something, but they don't know how they know it. And in your case,
and I would say that I had this again. I wasn't born to be a trader in my mind. In other words, I kind of came to this business, you know, maybe 7-8 years after college. I knew people, like, I didn't really know trading was like you. If somebody said, "Oh, I'm a trader," back in 1988 when I graduated from college, I would have been like, "What is that?"
Yeah.
I had friends that went to Chicago, went to New York, and some, you know, the New Yorkers, I would say, were investment bankers, which also I didn't really understand at the time. I'm like, what does that mean, investment bankers, right? But it didn't interest me. There was nothing there that really drew me in, the art of the deal, you know. Right. But as a kid, I was always like, details are easy for me to remember. I ask a lot of questions, probably to the people in my closest life, my wife, my kids, to an annoyance. And it's not because, you know, and by the way, I do have a psychotherapist that I meet with regularly myself. And, you know, that is my way of showing I care by asking those questions. And
yeah,
and I may appear not to hear you. You know, I definitely have some attention deficit disorder that probably I didn't realize until the last couple of years. And so putting that all together, I can go back and look at, you know, the ups and downs of my life and what the patterns are in those now, and drive change and,
right.
or at least recognition of those moments again. And I think that's really what you're talking about here, is we all have some level of intuition.
Yeah.
And it's, how do you bring it more to the forefront, trust in it, and not be fearful of it, and not be too exuberantly excited, you know, about it. Kind of keep it, you know, floating in a without getting elevated and, you know, ups and downs. And like, I've never had that problem with trading. I've never viewed it as, oh gosh, you know, that was dumb. I could always, and probably this was my coping attention deficit issues. I could push aside the failure right very quickly and start, you know, move on. And sometimes maybe not learn from that.
Mm-hmm.
So what I have learned is to, you know, part of the reason why I told you this, part of the reason why I've done interviews and podcasts, especially during this time of the day, the middle part of the trading day. I don't like, you know, I always tell people I'm really not a day trader to begin with. I never have been. I'm a position trader. And so we have an open and we have a close, everything in the middle. It's for me to meet people like Rande and learn more about myself and hopefully share that with other people. So this Intuit that I had, you know, I was really good at collecting baseball cards. You know, I was good at, I had a stamp collection. So I understood arbitrage. There was some, you know, biological thing from some, you know, previous life, however it is you want to call it. I had this knowledge, right? I was given, this gift, and I do see it as a gift. So I ask a lot of questions. I take it all in, and I can process. I think the hardest thing about trading, Randy, is that there is seriously so much information, and I think most human brains want to go, well, how do I need to compute all of that before I can make a decision.
All right.
And the reality is, in trading, you can't. There's rarely that time when everything lines up. In other words,
right.
You'll not trade if that is your mindset.
Right.
And so that's
There's
one
always
extreme.
ambiguity.
That's one extreme, and then you have the other extreme is, I don't need to know anything. I'm just going to trade, and I'm going to trade all the time, and I have no reason to trade, but I'm going to trade. And somewhere in between, that sweet spot is where everybody, I think, is trying to get. And that's, you talk about, you implement a process, and I agree with this completely. And I was talking to my psychotherapist about this yesterday, matter of fact, Randy. I mean, we all know that life isn't smooth. It's got this, it's got this, it's got down, ups and downs, ups and downs.
It's not your Facebook page, yeah.
Correct.
It's not all glorious and wonderful.
It's definitely not that, right? But the thing that I like, again, to intuit it is, I can take, my survival mechanism is better with volatility, right? But I have to have a process that I can come back to when we get in those moments of great unknowing and great, volatility and disruption. So I was talking about, things like, and I'm sure you've talked, some of this, but wearing the same types of clothes, like Steve Jobs did, or Barack Obama. They basically had two colored suits and a blue shirt and a white shirt. That's all he had. He had red ties and blue ties. Okay. Like, that takes that decision thought process out of my day. Or I'm going to eat one egg every morning, no toast, and have protein. Or I'm only going to eat between, say, 9 and 6 o'clock. The whole kind of a fasting way of eating versus taking days and weeks off. I like to eat between small periods of time, because therefore I'm not going to eat as much. So these little tools that I implement, I'm just curious, when you talk, and then mindfulness, I started using the Calm app about 1.5 years ago. And I finally was able to get to a spot where I can meditate regularly, and 10 to 20 minutes. And it's not a perfect practice for me, Randy.
Meditation's not supposed to be a perfect practice.
Right. But I finally had, through this, through the app Calm, I had somebody tell me that, and that resonated, and it works for me now.
Well, good.
Yeah, but I'm always learning. So talk to us a little bit about that process, and how you would go about working with me or a trader that wanted to employ you.
Yeah, the first and foremost is to recognize that the mind that you brought to trading is not going to be the mind that produces success in trading. And it's not that it's a bad mind, it's just that it's built for very different purposes than what trading needs. Is your brain, through evolution, was developed to control environment, to control outcome. Mm-hmm. It was developed to be a negative assessment machine. And what happens is that if you grasp that, and if you grasp that emotions really are not psychological at all, is they are biological, and they take over mind. As a matter of fact, in neurobiology, we would define emotions as biological action potentials that organize or coordinate the life between organism and environment, or trader and market. So, and if you begin observing your body, you will actually see, by the tension in your body and the way you breathe, you will actually see the emotion beginning to grow. Once you grasp that breathing and tension are part of the emotional arousal of an emotion. When you see tenseness, you're literally saying, oh, the emotion is growing.
Mm-hmm.
I need to be regulating it. Otherwise, it's going to grow to a moment where it hits a trip switch and it becomes a feeling state. And a feeling state is not this feeling. Feeling is literally the chemistry of an emotion in your brain and your body altering thought. And once you begin to grasp that, and you grasp that the brain is really a community of rival programs, and the mind is literally where these programs are given voice, and it's more like a committee, you begin to recognize, oh my God, I need to, instead of pretending that I'm not going to have emotions, I need to become an intelligent user of emotions.
Right.
To create the mind that can trade in probabilities. You have a mind that seeks certainty, seeks control, and there just isn't any control in trading.
Right.
You just have to give that up.
Thank you for saying that, because
Yeah.
I say it all the time, and people are like, "Well, why do you trade then?" I'm like, because I statistically still am better than the rest.
Well, that's the whole point. That's the probability-based mind. And what you're doing now is you're beginning to go, okay, I need to be able to regulate the emotion so that it doesn't trip the old hardwired fight-flight.
Mm-hmm.
And that's where, the very first stage of my work is emotional regulation, where you're using breath, what I would call bellows breathing and tension reduction to be able to manage the intensity of emotion. Does that change trading? No. What it does, though, is that until you learn to be able to manage the emotion, you're never going to get to the mind.
Mm-hmm.
You're just going to get hijacked before you get there. And then you go, okay, well, I've calmed the emotion down. I actually know there's emotions running around in my body, and I didn't, oh my God.
Yeah.
And if you watch yourself trade, not only the tension and the breath, you'll notice that traders get enormously fixated. They'll sit there like that. And, that's danger. When you see
the worst. Yeah.
When you sit, you're in tunnel vision there, and suddenly the emotion is telling you what to do, and it's not the right emotions that you want managing at that time.
Right.
But when you get to mindful, but in order to be able to get to mindfulness, you have to control the emotion. At mindfulness, what I'm teaching is that you and your thoughts, you and your beliefs are not the same. As a matter of fact, you're not having thoughts and beliefs, they're having you. Your job is to wake up and to begin to observe that, oh, I am not these thoughts. I need to start looking at this I. In neurobiology, what we would say is that what you're really doing is your brain is taking sensorial information, building a virtual representation that's based on your biases and beliefs, and projecting it onto the markets. You're getting feedback about its effectiveness in your trading account. But the thing is you're projecting a virtual representation on the markets. You're not projecting, you're not seeing the markets.
Right.
You're seeing your own personal interpretation of the markets, yeah. And it's your trading account's telling you whether or not it's an effective interpretation or not. And when you do that, you realize, oh my God, what's happened is I have this historical internal dialogue that's going on inside me all the time. And if you've ever said, I'm not having any internal dialogue, yeah, you are. Anytime you fall into self-doubt, anytime you beat yourself up, anytime you're sitting there going, what should I do? What should I do? You're hearing this internal struggle between right. different extremes and what would be known as perspectives in the mind. And ultimately what you're having to do is you're having to say, wait, who's having these perspectives in my mind? And it's a very important question. And you realize that we humans have some enormously destructive qualities about us, and we have some enormously constructive qualities. But if we're not observing what shows up in the moment, the chance is that the negative assessment machine, the destructive qualities, will take control, and you'll start choking, you'll start doing, and if you've ever had the mind of, after your trade's over with, you go, what was I thinking? You know what an emotional hijacking is, and you know what it's like to let what I would call the destructive elements grab you and take you for a spin around the block.
Yeah.
And you're going, okay, now I've got this. I know that there's this historical dialogue that can be very destructive. And then you're going, well, that's because that's the organization of a potential self that happened while I was not looking. You know, that's basically our formative period, what we would call childhood and stuff like that. And it's all downloaded into us through history without our knowledge, and it's just operating as if, oh, these are my thoughts. No, they're not.
Yeah.
And ultimately what you begin to learn is that you can go in and you can activate different emotional programs to spring forward during particular moments in time rather than the old default programming.
Yep.
And that's probably the most powerful thing that I teach. And, you know, ultimately what you learn is I am responsible for the mind that shows up in performance. And what I teach fundamentally is that you have no control over outcome at all. As hold to that illusion, you're going to have a really hard time in trading. However, what you do have control over is the mind that you bring into the moment of performance. And that's the big deal.
That is a big deal. And it's one that it's not easy. And I'm sure you will tell people that it's not easy.
It's not easy.
And it's also, as you said, it's almost like, it's almost like buying, let's say you bought a Windows machine and it's got Linux on it. You're like, wait, I didn't want Linux. And Linux starts overriding the Windows machine. And really, really what you want is an Apple iOS. And I'm just using this for story. I really think all three of them are junky operating systems, but the situation is there's problems with all of them, right? But you have to find the one that puts you into a state of mind that acknowledges your emotions because they're real. Like you can't, right? They're perceived or not, they're real.
They're going to show up anyway.
They're going to show up. The other. So, did you ever watch that show, The United States of Terra?
No, I never saw that.
You can probably pick it up on Amazon Prime now if you've got Amazon Prime.
Yeah.
I'm trying to think of the actress, but she was so good. She was basically she had multiple personality disorder, like severely, and she had a family and was married and had kids, and her whole family knew about it. Now, I'm not saying we're talking about the same thing here, but everybody's got some level of communal voice going on in their head.
Oh, that absolutely. And if you don't know that you don't have communal voice in your head, you're a sucker. You're just absolutely just setting yourself up to dry in the wrong place.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm just curious, what would be, and again, I know there's probably in our short time that we have, Randy, what would be a couple of the things that would kind of settle the commune, if you will, and put everything into a perspective where, okay, we've addressed that there's a lot of noise going on. It's erratic. It's angry. It's contentment, mad at yourself, whatever you want to call it. How do you settle the brain and go, that really wasn't, that the outcome, as you said, what had nothing to do with anything you did. And I always like to use the example of George Carlin, like in one of his old, sketches where George Carlin would say, God doesn't give a rat's ass F about God, what your touchdown that you just did there on the field. So stop talking to him. He doesn't care. And it's kind of the same thing in trading, in that like the market doesn't care, about your emotions. And it doesn't care that you bought or sold at any price.
It's irrelevant.
It's irrelevant.
Ultimately, what I will say is this, is that first you have to recognize that there is an internal struggle within various forces in the mind. And I actually define it along an archetypal line. Mm-hmm. I actually call that critic living within you, that the one that judges, the one that tempts. I call that the inner critic. And most people do everything they can to avoid dealing with that. And that gives this part of yourself enormous influence. And we cannot get past the destructiveness at all. There was an experiment. There have been a number of these experiments, but at UCLA during the late 60s, early 70s, there was an experiment where they recruited UCLA kids, students, to become guards in a prison. And they used graduate students from the psychology department as prisoners. And what they told everybody, what they told the guards was that we're going to use classical conditioning to get these guys obeying orders. And every time that they don't obey the order, what I want you to do is I want you to hit this button, and it's going to give an electrical shock to the prisoner. And if he doesn't obey the order, turn up the voltage, shock him again until he does it. Now, the prisoners, the graduate students, were in on this game.
Yeah.
And they were not really being shocked, but they were pretending they were being shocked.
Right.
They took a 5-day experiment. They had to close it down after 2 days because the guards, just white, upper middle class white kids in the late 60s and early 70s, thought they were lethally killing the prisoners.
Yeah.
And they actually saw the prisoners on the other side of the one-way mirror convulse and die. They thought that did. And what happens, they turned pretty okay college kids into murderers in 2 days.
Yeah. Well, it's
in their mind.
It's the whole Manson, Manson experiment.
Yeah. The thing, the key is that this capacity to self-destruction lives within all human beings. I call it the inner critic.
Right.
Okay? As a way of labeling it and saying, okay, when you hear this voice, you can depend on it being critical and judgmental. It's not you. It's the inner critic living in your mind. It's not going to go away. It's part of the architecture.
Yeah.
But at the same time, you also have fear, and our fear of grandiosity, that overconfidence business. And I call that orphan. That's another Jungian archetype. And this dominates, and what most people discover when they finally start waking up, this is dominating the trading mind under stress.
Right.
Okay, that's the real key. Is you can think fine when the money's not real, but when the money's real, the stress is real, suddenly you go back to the primitive programming.
Yeah.
But in the same way, you also have the discipline of a ruler, you have the courage of a warrior, you have the self-soothing of a caregiver, and you have the clear thinking of a sage that are also part of the mind's committee.
Yes.
And ultimately, often, and particularly the way memory is organized, is that the brain will take an experience and it will encode that experience according to beliefs and observation at that moment, and it will exclude a bunch of the experience.
Yeah.
And after it's encoded, it's no longer there. And what I do is I actually go back to encoded memories, take them apart, and reconstruct them so they get access to powerful programs that had to be present during the midst of challenges for them to be able to get through. And what we do is say, no, this is real. It's not visualization. It's not affirmations. It's real. You can actually get at the emotional memory, pull it forward, create the feeling state, and create the mind that feeling state produces. And you've created an emotional cocktail from these programs that produces the mind that can engage probability.
Yeah.
It's really cool stuff.
And
it's something that it's very trainable. And why it's not taught the moment that risk starts entering the a student's learning, I don't know. It just floors me. Everybody wants to ignore the white elephant in the room. Is that
I just finished an interview with Robin Hanson. Are you familiar with him?
Mm-hmm.
The elephant in the brain.
The elephant in the brain. And
he's a behavioral economist, and it's pretty. And again, you're more neuroscience based and biological, and he's saying he's not a scientist on the neuro side like you are, but you're both coming to the same juxtapose, which is there's a lot of noise going on there. A lot of it's true, a lot of it's untrue, and it's our jobs as the chairman of this board to sift through and get to the more probable outcomes.
Yeah, first wake up.
Yes.
That's the whole thing of and I literally call it awakening the observer theirself. And there's a section in psychology called the observing self, where you'll see it in Zen Buddhism, where you become witness to thought rather than thought itself, and you begin to see thought arise out of nothing, have a life, and go back to nothing, and you realize that there is this awareness outside of thought. And as you develop that, you begin to start realizing, oh my God, ultimately what I have is my brain has organized the potentiality that I am into a particular self based on circumstances. Mm-hmm. And some gifts, like you ended up with this extraordinary gift for intuition. The thing is that that's just simply phase one. There comes a moment when you start recognizing, if you grasp the observer, going, oh my God, is that this is all about the observer, is that we can step back out of thought and we can start designing the potentiality that we need to show up as in a particular given moment. And that's like with me, what I'm doing is, once you accept that you cannot control outcome, you let go of that. But at the same time, you recognize what I can control is performance. And winning is not a big deal at that particular time. All it is landing on the right side of probability.
Right.
Losing is not a very big deal.
Right.
It's just landing on the wrong side of probability. And as long as your methodology has an edge and you have a mind that can generate that edge, you're going to extract money out of markets.
So what I've found over time, Randy, with my own performance is, and I've learned to not trade is a trade. Number one, that's a hugely important piece of what I believe and teach. Is if you can't tell me where your risk is on, so probability, if you can't tell me where the probability is wrong on this trade or this idea, then don't take it. And people look at you like, well, that's easy. But it's true. If and from day one, I don't know, again, I can't, maybe you and I will do some private sessions where we can get into this. I was I was okay with being wrong when it came to trading.
Good.
So that part's not a problem.
As a matter of fact,
go ahead.
It's interesting. What happens with the mindset that people bring to trading is they want to be a winner. They want to make things happen. They don't want to lose. And first of all, you can't make things happen. You're basically saying, we want to show me where you want to go and me take a guess on if that's right or not. And the most powerful thing that a trader has to learn in trading is to become a very good and accomplished loser.
Yes.
You're going to be doing a lot of losing.
Yeah.
And you're going to have to minimize those losses, and you just can't get suckered in.
And I think people gloss over this. You hear the Paul Tudor Joneses and the Soroses of the world talk about this stuff, and even Buffett. And they're all different operators, and they're all in the auction. And I call the markets auctions, by the way, because it's all.
I like that.
Well, because they are. If markets are truly free, which we could debate that today, depending on the market. But if they are truly free, and I would say the most free market out there right now is alternative currencies, if they're if they're legit, and let's call Bitcoin legit. It's the big daddy.
Yeah.
And the CME legitimizes it coming up here soon in December. It'll be trading on their exchange. So if all those things are true and it's liquid and it's transparent, and participants are into it for different reasons, right? I go to the auction because I'm in the excavation business. So I go to buy a backhoe because I've got 30 of them, but I just took on two new projects. I need 5 new ones because those other 30 are out in the field somewhere already. You used to work for me and you want to go into your own excavation business and you have one client and you have limited money. The client's paid you some money to start working, but you can't afford to pay any price for the same backhoe. You have a value in mind, whereas me as the larger performer, I don't care. It's not going to affect the total. So this is where I try to explain to people, trading is not a true zero-sum trade, because although I will pay the higher price today, you will wait for another week until you get the price to come back to where you want it. Right? It's not going to make a difference for you.
Right.
To pay it, or it's not going to make a difference for the large provider, because he's got, it's basically just another project. It's smoothing risk over for him. But for you, it makes a huge difference in your profit margins, because it's the only client you have, and you have a budget to work within, and you can't spend the kind of money that they can. So in that sense, markets are never true zero-sum games, because the buyers and sellers aren't buying and selling for the same reason at the same time.
They aren't. And when you get into that level, there's
this is for some reason, Randy, this is very difficult for people to grasp.
And, you want to believe in a simple world. You want to believe this structure. And until you come to the moment that you're willing to recognize that the mindset you're bringing is not going to be effective, is you're going to continually, even though you get negative feedback, your identity is so staked to a position that you're not willing to give it up.
Yeah.
And what happens is those guys bleed.
Mm-hmm. They're carried out on the stretcher. Because again, the market doesn't care about your ego or whatever it was that you needed to have satisfied at that moment. It'll take you out on the stretcher.
It doesn't care. It doesn't matter. It doesn't care if you're the small guy. It doesn't care if somebody can move markets. What happens is that if you're going to be a small guy, can you nimbly operate in the margins? That's basically what's being said, because you're not moving mountains.
No. And I don't believe that long term anybody can continue to move the mountains. So most movement that can happen via again, legal mechanisms are short term anyway. So that's where I truly believe that any trader of any size has an opportunity if they look at it that way. They're just going, okay, that. You see exhaustive moves all the time in the market, and it's usually because somebody's trying to probe and see if anybody else is behind there, just to see, right? So they'll push it up. I mean, I'm looking at an oil chart as we speak, and you saw this the last couple of days with everything that's going on in Saudi Arabia, the arrests, and it's very noisy. It's very, very noisy, and price is being driven up. Is it fundamental? Probably not. Is it technical? Yes, in some sense, is that we're taking out 2-year highs, but guess what? There's another high behind that's even bigger. So don't get too sucked into, we're off to the races. We're going back to $150 in crude oil, because fundamentally that doesn't make sense to me. However, I have to be okay with, if it goes over, let's say we're trading $58 a barrel today. If it goes to 63, I would say that I'm wrong for the time being. And that's the hard thing about trading, is to say that to people. They're like, well, you're just talking out of both sides of your mouth. No, I'm contingently doing so, but I have scenarios where risk on, risk off, and I can go both ways. That's the beautiful thing about what we do, is I can change my mind probability wise if information changes.
Yeah, if the market's telling you something different, then you should change your mind. It's there is no absolute truth here. What there is as Stephen Colbert would say, truthiness.
Yeah.
But the thing is that the worst thing that you can do is fall into truthiness, because ultimately, people love a sense of certainty. The chemistry of certainty really feels good.
Mm-hmm.
You know, there may be no evidence to support the certainty, but the emotional certainty makes you feel good, and you will absolutely not take in new information to change position, and you get clobbered.
Yeah. And again,
if you realize there's no certainty, it's a different game.
And another thing, it was interesting. I've been working with clients both from institutional down to smaller traders for 12 years now. And one of the students in the last couple of years said to me one day, and he had been working with me for a couple months, and he said, "Hey, Matt, wait, back up. You just said that 80% of the trades that are successful for you go against you." And I said, "Yeah, probably maybe 90. And he's like, "Well, what do you mean by that?" I said, "Well, I have a risk when I put on a trade, as I discussed with my clients. And when I'm wrong, I take the trade off. That's the easy part for me."
Yeah.
The hard part for most people, though, is being wrong in that trade, that same trade, even though it hasn't got to technically I'm exiting the trade. The execution hasn't happened, but it goes from I'm $500 in the red to $2,000, and maybe I can go to 20. I'm just throwing numbers out. Whatever the number is, if I'm losing a couple grand and I can go to 10, then I can either sell more, I can buy more. There's a lot of things I can do, and I have a process within that. But he didn't really realize that 80 or 90% of the trades, if I'm buying something, it goes down. If I'm selling something, it goes up. And he was like, because he really, in his mind, thought that I had this, holy grail magic thing. And I told him, I said, again, I always say it doesn't exist. You have to be good in some discomfort. Yes. And the discomfort is nothing but temporary, as it generally is in life, right? We all go, and right. I think there's to your point, you said this before we came on air, Randy, there's so much about trading that is so great because the chit or the scorecard tells you how well you're doing, right? And if it's luck or if it's process. You do if you've been doing this long,
right?
But the thing that most people don't realize is most of the time I'm in some 90% of the time I'm in some state of drawdown, mm-hmm. And I've made money every month, every year for 28 years. But you're always in a state of drawdown. And that is hard for people to wrap their head around. In other words, the trades that I beat myself most up over, Randy, are the ones where I just get a little bit, say 10% of my size on, and it starts going my way right away. And it's over. Those are the ones that are hardest for me, Randy. Isn't that strange?
It is.
But it's because I didn't have enough on. I wasn't big enough, right? You go through all those, but that's only 10% of the time. So here's the lesson for me that I share with people, the way I trade, is that only 10% of the time do I really feel that way. And the rest, I'm in a state of drawdown until I eventually win.
I tell you what, if you take a look at basically, if you map a person's wins and losses, what you'll do, particularly if you're looking at a portfolio manager and he traditionally will have 10, 20, 30 positions open at one time, and you're seeing his aggregates through time, is what you will see is most of them are tiny losses. Yeah. And you'll see really interesting moments where a lot of money is made, and then what you discover is and every once in a while when he loses his cool, you'll see one of these big, huge losses, and that's when the risk manager comes and talks to you, But what you're seeing,
and by the way, professionally, whenever I've had the call or the knock on the door from my risk manager, I knew, I told him, I would tell it was he for me most of the time. I would tell him that, thank you, you're right, I'm too big, I'll pull some off. Or there was, I can tell you also, some of my biggest losses were a risk manager telling me, listen, you're bigger than we are comfortable with, we, collectively, you and me. Yes, I agree with you, I would say to him. And he'd say, well, why don't you just pull a little bit off? Right? What do you think I did like the first time that happened?
What did you do?
Pulled it all off. It was super invigorating because it was finally gone from my books. Guess what? 2 weeks later, that same trade, would have made me $20 million, would have made the firm $20 million. Instead, I lost $1.5 million, something like that.
So much for certainty.
Well, but and I knew that, and I knew it at the moment. And then, but what I would say is the next time that happened, where my risk manager was doing his job, I said, okay, I'm going to take 10% off. He's like, great. And guess what? 2 weeks later, the trade worked out. So a lot of times I think the brain needs to be freed up, and sometimes counsel from outside of your brain that is probability based is there to help you. So don't
They're
fight.
there to help you.
Yeah. So don't fight those guys is the lesson there. And we all can, again, part of the reason I'm going to wrap this up, Randy, with a transition and say that reach out to guys like me, reach out to guys like Randy, because you can work through this stuff, guys, girls. And I'd like to see more women, by the way, because I think women, I'm curious, how many of your clients are, if you percentage wise, are female traders?
Oh gosh, maybe 1 in 10.
10%.
And if that, and it's a shame because, ultimately, women don't have to deal with one big problem that men do. It's called testosterone. And testosterone, once it kicks in, it's going to, it will take where you are willing to do risk, and it will take you to where you're just absolutely will take on more risk than the human should ever get on. And what happens is women as estrogen-based life forms don't have that problem. And if with well-trained and getting their act together, they actually can become much more consistently profitable traders than men.
Thank you for saying that. I've said it for years, and I will go on this podcast and say it again. All of you women out there who are already managing finances for the house, because you're much more pragmatic and basic and straightforward and not ego driven when it comes to money.
Right.
When it comes to money, you're not. Now, rugs and shoes, that's a different story sometimes. But that's more, that's the way that women show their egos, the way they look and feel and all that. But
yep. That's a different story.
That's a different story. That's a totally different story. So I would say to you, women, pick up the phone, contact Randy, contact me. And the process of trading is nothing but that. It's a process. And if you can get to a spot where you can view an auction intuitively better than the rest of the participants because they're monkeys, their monkey brains are taking over, take advantage of it. And that's all it is. And I don't mean that in a derogatory way, because I'm a monkey. I'm as equal monkey as the next guy, right? But I know that about myself. I know that I have those tendencies and that ego going, but I've never been one to go, shit, I just made, $3 million today. Shit, I just lost, $1 million today. Neither one excites me, quite honestly. You know what excites me, Randy, is talking to people like you and solidifying the fact that I have work to do on myself, and I can be a better person. I can, try to rule that committee that is noisy in my head. It's definitely noisy.
You're just being honest. Everybody has a noisy committee, and trying to ignore it is I think it can be done in regular life. Ignoring it in trading life will get you in boundless trouble. Yep. And you're going to have to learn. I find trading, there's necessity unless you happen to become high functioning autistic, win the genetics lottery. you really have to produce self-mastery, emotional self-mastery, to be able to build a mind that can engage the uncertainty and the vulnerability that comes with uncertainty, and maintain that solid mind of performance. It requires self-mastery.
Well, Randy, I want to thank you for your time today, Randy Howell. And where can people find you on the internet? Just why don't you give a shout out to
It's www.my Trader State of Mind. And it used to be Trader State of Mind, but long story is that it's now My Trader State of Mind.
Okay, so they can find you at www.mytraderstate of mind.
Yep, or just type in Rande, R-A-N-D-E, Howell, H-W-E-L-L into Google, and it'll get you there.
Yep, and I appreciate you doing this, Randy. And I'm going to we're going to talk offline how I could get working with you also. So I appreciate you coming on today. I am Matt with the 1 Minute Trader podcast, and keep your questions coming. You can write me at matt@OneMinuteTrader.TV, and you can find us on Twitter at 1MinuteTrader, or my old handle, my personal handle, at Miss Trade. Thanks again for listening and watching, and please like us on iTunes, Stitcher, and any of the other podcast channels that you may find us, Spotify, etc. Please listen and tell your friends as always. Thank you.